Okay, how's everybody doing today? Awesome. Well, listen, it is wonderful to be here. I'm super excited to be here in Edmonton and be at this amazing event, and looking forward to spending some time with you. So basically what I'm going to be talking about is the art of early stage investing, and talking about some of the lessons that I've learned. I have been in venture capital now for about 12 years, and so I'm going to share with you some of the lessons that I've learned along the way, as well as a couple of things about myself. And so I thought I would start off with a little bit of background around who I am and what I've learned along my journey, and then I think that helps to give some context in terms of sort of what I've learned through my years of investing. So first of all, I'll talk about the start. So how did I get my start into the business world? Sort of an interesting story. When I was 14 years old, I was the youngest of 4 children, and my older siblings were all working in summer jobs, because we were sort of taught, hey, as you get older, we should all be working in summer jobs, making money to go to university. And so I had thought when I was 14 that, hey, the next summer I should probably get a job. And so I did some, I was reading a book actually that summer, a book on business, and a book called Iacocca, which was about the guy who turned Chrysler around. And so I became really fascinated with the idea of business, and I thought, you know what, next summer I want to do something really interesting in business. I want to learn more about business. And I thought, well, as a 15-year-old person who's never been in business before, if I go and get a job, I'm not going to get a job where I will really be challenged and learn about business. And so I'm going to create the opportunity for myself. And I decided that I would start my own business. So I started this business called Muffin Magic. And it was basically, a muffin business. I would wake up at about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and make 30 to 40 dozen muffins. And so you can see me cooking in the kitchen, and then my muffins, and then I would deliver them to stores on my bicycle. So I had about 15 or 20 stores in the Toronto area where I would deliver my freshly baked muffins to the stores when the stores opened. So that was my first foray into business. And I mean, one story about that is we lived near Yonge Street, and there was about a 2-mile stretch with a lot of little stores, so small restaurants, delicatessens, things like that. And so one day I thought, okay, I'm going to walk all the way down one side of the street, calling on these stores, seeing if I can get these stores to sell my muffins. And then I'm going to turn around and walk all the way back up the other side. And so I started walking down the street, and it was like it was a June day. It was over 30 degrees. I had uncomfortable shoes on and a long sleeve shirt, and I got all the way down to the end, and I was like, okay, every single store that I had called on had said no to me. So I got down 2 miles. I had called on a bunch of stores. I was tired. I was discouraged. I was hot, and I thought, you know what? I think I'm just going to take the subway home, and I'll come back another day and do call on the rest of the stores. But then I thought to myself, no, Janet, you said you were going to go all the way there and all the way back, so just keep going. So I kept going, and I kept calling on those stores, and I got 5 stores to sell my muffins. And so again, I think the lesson from this is just, having initiative, having perseverance, and creating your own opportunities. And I think then I'll just sort of go forward onto the next thing. So I did the muffin business. I ran a couple of other businesses throughout high school. Went on to university, graduated from university, started my career at Procter & Gamble. Worked at Procter & Gamble for about 4 years, then worked at McKinsey. And I was at McKinsey doing a project, and this was 1999. So I know I may be dating myself a little bit, but it was 1999. I was working at McKinsey, and I realized that technology was going to change every single industry and every functional area. And I thought, if I want to be relevant on an ongoing basis, I need to learn about technology, and the longer I wait, the harder it's going to be. And so I thought, okay, I have an entrepreneur. I don't have any technology background per se. I went to business school and had not worked in technology. But I thought, what I should do, I had this idea that I should move to Silicon Valley and join a fast-growing tech company. to learn more about entrepreneurship as well as to learn more about technology. And I just thought it would be a really great broadening experience. So I thought, okay, I don't know anything about technology, really. I don't have any work visa to the US. I don't know anybody in Silicon Valley. So what am I going to do? And I thought, what I'll do is I'll reach out to a bunch of venture capital firms, and because that's going to be more efficient. I'll reach out to a bunch of venture capital firms and see if any of them have openings at any of their tech companies. So I went online and I looked at the top venture capital firms, and there was Benchmark, who was on the list, and there was a guy, his name was Bob Cagle. There's a picture of Bob there. More recently, Bob Cagle, who was there. Now, his background was in consumer packaged goods and management consulting, the same as mine. So I was like, okay, awesome, this is my guy. So this guy, he's going to see some relevance in me, you know, maybe he'll be able to introduce me to some people. So I called him up and left him a voicemail message. And didn't hear back, so okay, no problem. I sent a couple days later, I sent him an email, don't hear back. A couple days later, I call him up. A couple days later, I email him. This goes on for about 3 weeks. Finally, his assistant calls me, and she says, Janet, Bob has got all your messages, and he has nothing for you. And I said, oh, okay, well, listen, let me tell you, you know, it's really interesting. Bob and I have a similar background. I think it would be great for him to chat with me, and I got some ideas. So she was like, okay, you're living in Toronto? Great. You let me know next time you're in Silicon Valley, and I will get you half an hour on Bob's calendar. So I said, great. So I called her up the next day, and I said, hey, I'm going to be in Silicon Valley next week. Can I get that meeting with Bob? So I don't know. I'm sure her eyes rolled in the back of her head, but true to her word, she said, okay, she got me on his calendar. So the next week, I flew out to San Francisco, went to Silicon Valley to meet with him. Now, in the meantime, I had done a little bit of research on him, because I was like, okay, now I got my meeting with this dude, I better find out a little bit more about him. And I found out that he was actually quite a legend in Silicon Valley, and amongst other things, he had put the original money into eBay. So anyways, when I found out he was a bit of a legend in Silicon Valley and there had been a book written about him, I sort of thought, oh, good thing I didn't know all that, or I may not have had the nerve to call him up and say, hey, Bob, it's Janet Bannister following up on my voicemail. So I just think that sort of is a little bit interesting in terms of sometimes what you don't know can be helpful. But anyways, I went and I met with Bob. We had a great conversation. He was like, Janet, you got to join eBay. eBay was growing really quickly at that point. He was like, how long are you in town for? I said, oh, I'm in town for a couple days. So he said, okay, great. I got a board meeting at eBay tomorrow. I'm going to tell Meg Whitman, who is the CEO of eBay, I'm going to tell her she needs to meet with you. So great. So next day, my phone rings. The voice at the other end says, hey, Janet, it's Meg Whitman. I just got out of a meeting with Bob. I understand I got to meet you, and you're only here for a couple days. Can you come over to our office right now? I said, sure can. So I hopped in my little rental car, went and met with her, and 2 weeks later, I was living in Silicon Valley working for eBay. And I like to tell that story because I think it shows a lot about initiative and persistence, and also around architecting your own life and taking the time and the energy to think about where do you want to go, and then making plans to get there and figuring out a path. So as I said, moved to Silicon Valley, joined eBay. When I joined eBay, there's a picture of the website from back then. Looks a little different now. About 80 or 90% of the things bought and sold on eBay were collectibles. So things like coins, stamps, etc. And I was given responsibility for all the non-collectibles categories. So things like clothing, home and garden, jewelry, books, etc. And basically, we tripled or quadrupled those categories year over year for about 4 years, and really changed eBay to a more of a mainstream marketplace. So again, amazing experience, absolutely loved it. But then after about 4 years, decided that I wanted to come back to Canada. I'm a very patriotic Canadian. My husband is Canadian as well. We decided we wanted to move back to Canada and raise our family here. So I moved back to Canada. So I went to eBay and I said, hey, eBay, you know, I want to move back to Canada. And they were very good about it. They said, okay, well, if that's really what you want to do, we'll transfer you back. So then they came and they came back to me and they said, okay, well, Janet, the only open position we have at eBay Canada is head of product. And I sort of thought, oh, that doesn't sound too exciting. the whole eBay business in Canada is a lot smaller than the business I was running, and I'm not even going to get to run it. I'm going to be head of product. But I thought, you know what, Janet, that's okay. I'm going to go back to Canada, and I'm going to have this role, and I'm going to learn from it, and I'm going to take the opportunity and from there, I will figure out what I want to do. And so I came back, and this is the start of the business Kijiji, because I came back with eBay to Canada, and the first thing I did was I benchmarked how is eBay doing in Canada relative to how eBay's doing in every other country around the world. And what I found was that Canadians were spending on eBay specifically. We were doing great in terms of getting people to the site. In fact, Canada was one of the highest countries around the world in terms of the percentage of online users who were coming to the site every month. And yet, we were less than half of every other country around the world in terms of converting those visitors to actually do anything on the site, just like bid on an item, sell an item, etc. So the eBay business, we tried to do things on the eBay side, but what I realized was this was not an eBay-specific issue, and in fact, Canadians as a whole, so this is like 2004, 2005, but actually these trends still hold. That Canadians spend a ton of time online, very high online usage. And in fact, back in 2004, 2005, Canadians spent more time online per capita than any other country except for South Korea. But in terms of Canadians purchasing online, it was actually half of America, half of the UK, and half of many other countries. And so I said, okay, Canada is a country of people who research online and conduct transactions offline. I don't think I'm going to change that in the near term. So how can we build a business that is more suited to their needs, to the Canadians' needs? And I came up with actually 4 or 5 different ideas, everything from should we be partnering with big box retailers and do a comparison shopping site where then people go to the stores to buy it. Anyways, I finally sort of came to the conclusion that we should be launching a classified site in Canada because you're researching online, transacting in person. So, and besides which, classifieds is, like, how many people know what Kijiji is? Okay, great. If anybody doesn't, and everybody from the States or something, Kijiji is like, it's similar to Craigslist. So, anyway, so I had this idea. So I went to the folks at eBay and I shared, oh, sorry, I was going to say the other thing about Canada is a very urbanized country. So about 85% of the population of Canada lives in an urban center. And if you want a classifieds business to work, you need people in the same city. So I went to the executives at eBay in California and I said, hey guys, like, here's the idea. I don't think that the eBay model is best for Canadians at this time. I think what we should be doing is launching a classifieds business. And they said, oh, well, no, like, nice idea, Janet, but no. Canada's not really a priority. This doesn't really seem to fit in with our other things, so no. But I had this idea, and I was really excited about it. So I kept digging around and found out that eBay was getting ready to launch a classified site over in Europe. So went over, so found out that they were launching a classified site in Europe. So went back to the executives in California and I said, hey, I know the eBay is building this site to launch in Europe. How about I just take that code and launch it in Canada? And then customize it, take the platform and launch it in Canada. Anyways, they didn't think it would be possible, but I finally convinced them. And I think this is a part around believing in your own vision. Everybody at eBay was convinced that this did not work. I think they just got tired of me asking. So then they finally said, okay, you can take the platform, but you can go and you can go on your own. And like, we love you, Janet, but we're going to backfill your role at eBay. So if it doesn't turn out, like, you probably won't have a job back here. But I was convinced that it would work, and so hence we launched Kijiji, and within a couple of years it was one of the most visited sites in Canada. So again, lots of learnings there, and lots of, but I mean, I remember, and I'll just use this as one little example because I think it feeds into this whole concept about believing in your vision and believing in yourself. That when we launched Kijiji, we really didn't have much money, like to market. So we were relying on natural search. But I was always phoning up different media outlets to try to get PR, because I thought this would be a good way to build awareness. And so I would phone them up. Finally, one time, I got a hold of a reporter at the National Post who said he would write about Kijiji. So I was like, yes, 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 yes. So I went out and I met with him, and I was all excited, and I had my talking points, and we sat there down, and he basically proceeded for the next 30 minutes to berate me and tell me how this would never work, and it was a terrible idea, and didn't I know that newspaper classifieds worked, and Craigslist was already in Canada, and it was terrible, terrible, terrible. And I remember driving home from that thinking, oh my goodness, what am I doing? What am I doing, Janet? But then I thought to myself, Janet, you have a choice of how you're going to react. You can either get discouraged or you can get determined. And I thought, you know what? Screw him. I'm going to show him, and I'm going to build a business, and we're going to create something. And so, again, I think the lesson that I took away from this is, believe in your vision, believe in yourself, and there's always going to be people who are trying to tell you what not to do. I think the other thing then, going on to sort of what I'm doing now, about 12 years ago, I joined a venture capital firm called Real Ventures, which invests in early stage startup companies, was the most active early stage investor at that time. Spent about 9 years at Real Ventures, great opportunity, and then left Real Ventures and launched my own venture capital firm, which is called Staircase Ventures. And we raise money, so as I said, so Staircase Ventures, we lead seed stage rounds into primarily Canadian-based business-to-business software companies. And I think, lots of lessons from there, lots of sort of insights. I think one of the biggest things, and I'm a huge believer in, again, believe in yourself. And I went out and was going to raise this fund. Decided in 2022, in the fall of 2022, I decided that I was going to leave Real Ventures and launch my own venture capital fund. And it was it still is, but I think it was even worse back then in terms of a really tough time to raise venture capital funds. But, I believed in myself, I believed in what I could do, I believed in it building a different type of venture capital fund. And so basically we were able to raise, our initial target was 20 to 25 million. Often to raise a first-time fund, it takes 12 to 18 months. We closed 22 million within the first 3 months of starting the raise, and then by the end of the summer, by the end of the summer of 2023, we had closed out the whole fund, and we'd have to raise the cap, and we ended up raising $34 million. So anyways, that's what I do now, and as I said, just around the bet around believing in yourself and believing in your vision. Okay, now I'm going to talk about more broadly. I've got 4 major themes that I want to talk to you about in terms of insights that I've learned. So first of all, I'm going to talk about Canada. Canada, I believe, is a great place to build a business, and I'm going to talk to you about that. Next, I'm going to talk about the founders and what we look for in founders and some of the learnings that I have had from working with founders. Then we're going to talk about the company and lessons that I have gleaned in working with early stage startups, what differentiates successful companies from unsuccessful companies. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the mindset, and the mindset that I have seen is most successful, and or the mindset traits that correlate with successful founders. So first of all, Canada. So Canada, I believe it's a great country in which to build an early stage startup company. There's a lot of negative rhetoric. I find sometimes Canadians sometimes Canadians are positive, sometimes they can be negative around the challenges and the brain drain and there's not enough capital and this and that. I believe that Canada is one of the best places in the world to build a business. And why do I think that? A couple of reasons. First of all, immigration. So Canada, as you know, is one of the most immigrant-friendly countries in the world. Overall, 23% of our population are immigrants. In Toronto, specifically, 50% of the population is born outside Canada. And what does that mean? I think what that means is, first of all, if you look at the stats in the US, over 50% of unicorn founders are immigrants. Immigrants tend to bring a different perspective. They tend to be very entrepreneurial, And when they join companies, they add a lot of variety. They add diversity. We've all seen all the stats in terms of the importance of diversity and diverse thinking. And so I think that we as a country benefit from our diversity and from our immigration. The second thing is world-class tech and AI schools. So University of, again, there's more great schools in Canada than this, but just highlighted a few. Waterloo, obviously known internationally for their engineering, for their co-op program, for their engineering, for their entrepreneurship. University of Toronto, University of Montreal, University of Alberta, as you know, the founding fathers of AI, Jeff Hinton, Yoshua Bengio, and Richard Sutton came from these institutions. We are blessed in terms of the talent and the quality of the talent that comes from our schools. And we've got an active support system. Obviously, we've got Amy, which is great, which is hosting us today. We've got C100, which is an organization that I'm very heavily involved in. C100 supports the best and brightest, the highest potential Canadian companies. It's a global network really focused on mentorship and connecting Canadians with other great founders and advisors. Obviously, you know, we've got lots more Creative Destruction Lab, in a university-based program that helps founders through connections to universities as well as through mentorship. Vector, Communitech, Scale AI, Next Canada, as I said, lots of great programs that are helping founders succeed. This chart was sort of interesting to me in terms of unicorns per capita. Not surprisingly, this is among G20. Not surprisingly, the US is out front, but Canada is actually tied for second with the UK. So I thought this was an interesting stat. I will say that as I spend a lot of time in Silicon Valley talking to different investors, US investors want to invest more in Canada. Every time I go down to Silicon Valley, I meet with probably somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen US venture capital firms, and they all say the same thing. They all say, Janet, introduce us to your best companies. We want to do more investing in Canada. Why do they want to invest more in Canada? They find that the technical talent is outstanding. They find that people in Canada are focused on building things that last, tend to build much more economically efficient companies, and they say, hey, Canada is a great place to build a business. So, as I said, very bullish on Canada. Any entrepreneurs out there would encourage you to build your business in Canada. The next thing, insights gained. So I'm going to talk a little bit about founders. I believe that founders are the most critical success factor in any company. And the first thing I say is, hey, founders are people too. And I think, and I'm going to talk a little bit next about Staircase Ventures and our perspective there. But I think that too many venture capital, actually, let me just ask, how many of you are investors in the audience? Okay, a couple. How many of you are founders? Okay. How many think in the future you might like to be a founder? Okay, great. Okay. How many of you work at a startup? Okay, great. Okay. So let me tell you a little bit about founders. I find that too many venture capital folks approach founders like they only see them in one dimension, right? They see them in terms of you as in the business, right? And I'm like, founders are people too, right? They've got whole lives, they've got families, they've got external stresses, they've got all this stuff. And we need to treat founders, as I said, as whole people. And what I mean by this is, for instance, I remember in a board meeting, and there was and then we had the board meeting and it was okay. And then afterwards, one of the investors started going on about this founder, and they weren't all in, and were they, and all this stuff, sort of criticizing the founder. And I said, well, do you realize that their child is in the hospital and they're having a really tough time with their marriage? And the other investor said, no, I had no idea. I said, well, basically, and I said, well, this is what's happening in this guy's life. So let's evaluate him based on that, and let's understand him and figure out how we can support him through this tough time as he is trying to balance all of these things plus the company. And so, as I said, that's what I mean by founders are people too. And so I think it's super important as an investor to think about our founders holistically. And that leads us into, I sort of alluded to this earlier in terms of Staircase Ventures. One of the things that really inspired me to launch my own fund and to launch Staircase Ventures is I said, what's interesting is most early stage investors will say, yes, I get it, the founders are the most important success factor in a company. And then if you ask those same investors, okay, tell me about how you add value to the company post-investment, they will talk about how they add value to the company. They might say things like, oh, you know what, we help with the hiring, maybe we help with your strategy, we introduce you to prospective customers. But my perspective is, okay, that's fine, but if the founders are the most important thing, then we should be doubling down on supporting the founders and helping them both grow and develop, as well as helping them perform their best every day. And so what's unique about Staircase Ventures is we came out with this platform where we said, and we have 5 pillars, and the first 2 are really around how can we accelerate the founders' growth. And so one thing that we pay for executive coaching for all of our CEOs. We also have peer learning groups so that our founders can learn from other peers. Again, we have found that this is really important and can differentiate the success. So those 2 first pillars really talk about, hey, how can we help founders learn and grow and develop? And then the other ones are about, okay, how do you show up your best every day? Because it's fine to know what to do, but it's another thing to have the energy and the mindset in order to do what needs to be done. And so the next thing we do is we have health and wellness programs. So all of our founders have access to a confidential health coach at Cleveland Clinic who can provide them with anything from mental, physical, emotional health. We also have a personal financial advisor to help all our founders think about that aspect of their life, as well as we have family support programs where we provide confidential counseling as well as cash stipend to help our founders manage their families so that money, as I always say, money can be used for child care, elder care. It can be used for, taking your significant other or your best friend out for dinner or for a weekend away. And so these are just some of the ways that we get involved in terms of helping our founders, because we have learned that the founders are the most important success factor, and so our job is to help them perform their best every day. One of the things that I am often asked is, how do you define, how do you decide which founders to invest in? What do you look for? What are the key traits you look for? And so what I have learned through my years of investing is the most successful founders, if you look at the most successful founders, it is not correlated with number of years work experience. Have you worked in the industry? Like those things which when I got into venture capital, I thought, well, those are the things, right? Like I'm just going to invest in people who have 10 to 20 years work experience and know the industry, because then they'll be more successful. But what I actually found is those things are not correlated to success. And the things that are correlated to success, I have found, are these 3 key traits. And I will say, it sort of goes without saying that, things like, being smart, being honest, doing it like hardworking, those things are just sort of like assumed to get on the playing field. But beyond that, these 3 things. Number 1 is a growth mindset. It is super important as a founder that you are always learning and growing. Your job changes every 6 months, and so we are always looking for founders who have that growth mindset, who are hungry for feedback, who adopt and who learn. The other thing is the ability to attract outstanding people. It doesn't matter how great you are if you cannot attract, motivate, and retain outstanding team members, because nobody is ever going to build a great company by themselves. And so that's the second thing that's super important. And then the third thing is just the speed of execution, the hustle factor. And so I think about it as a cycle, how quickly do you execute on something? Do you learn, iterate, and execute again? Because so much of early stage startup life is trying different things, seeing what works, execute, learn, iterate, keep going around that cycle as quickly as possible and getting better every time. So again, these are the key things that we look for in terms of founders. So as I said, that's a bit of founders. And by the way, we're going to have lots of time for questions, so I can't wait to get your questions at the end. The next thing is about the company, right? And so, what do we look for? How do we decide what type of companies to invest into? And what have I learned about investing in successful companies? So I have what I call mandates for early stage success for early stage tech companies. So the first thing is to say, be clear on your long-term competitive advantage. This is the one thing that I find is missing from almost all pitch decks that I see, is clarity on long-term competitive advantage. It actually amazes me how few companies at the early stage are able to articulate this. They're often able to articulate, like, they get a company, right? And you got, you've seen all the graphs, right? Where you've got like a grid, and, hey, your company, and then you've got competitor A, competitor B, competitor C, and they got all the different attributes, and your company has all the check marks, and everybody else has a couple of check marks. It's like, anyways. But that, to me, is not the relevant thing. The question is, how are you going to win long term? Why is nobody else going to copy you? Once you start to get traction, once you show the world that this works, that your idea is brilliant, how are you going to maintain your competitive advantage? And I think that is one thing that I would say to anybody who is starting a business, to really think deeply about that. And and it can come whether it's from data or network effects, or just being the first in market and achieving that runaway success, or community or brand or something. You've got to have something that says, hey, how you are going to win long term. The next thing is keep your burn rate, like i.e. your spend, as low as possible until you achieve product market fit. This is super important. I have found that one of the big challenges for companies actually is when they raise too much money at the early stages. Often what happens when companies, they've got a great team and a great concept, and they go out and raise a significant amount of money, I have found in my experience, as often as not, that comes back and haunts the company because they start spending money before they really know where to spend the money. Or I sort of like the expression, if you have a lot of money, you focus on spending it. If you don't have a lot of money, you focus on making it. And so you want the company to be focused on making the money. So as I said, just keep your burn as low until you have nailed your product market fit. You want to keep your spending as low as possible, because frankly, you don't know how long it's going to take to get to that product market fit, to nail that, and to be able to start getting your revenue in. And I think sort of tied to that, what I have found is often the go-to-market is the hardest thing to nail and to scale. And so again, don't underestimate the importance of that, and the importance of going out and talking to people. I think a lot of folks, particularly who are technical, think that, hey, if I've got a great product that meets a customer need, well, I've solved the problem. No, actually, the go-to-market, figuring out how am I going to reach my customers? How am I going to do it quickly? How am I going to onboard them, upsell them? How am I going to service them? How am I going to make sure that my churn is low? How am I going to do that at scale? How am I going to make sure that my cost of acquiring a customer is significantly lower than the cost that I'm going to, the gross profit that I'm going to make on those customers? These things I believe, are some of the most important things. And one of the reasons why go-to-market is often a difficult thing to nail is I have found that there's so many different variables that you can adjust. So if you have your product and you go out and you start selling, and maybe it doesn't resonate with the customer, okay, does that mean you need to change the product? Does that mean you need to change the customer? Does that mean, hey, actually you've got the right product, but you're just not selling it properly? And so, really taking the time to figure out, okay, who is your right customer? Who's your target customer? How are you going to get to them? How are you going to market them? And continually experimenting is one of the most important things. And I would just say, hey, don't underestimate how challenging this is and how many companies fall down because they're not able to really nail and scale their go-to-market. Next thing, your team is the most important asset. Maybe this goes without saying, but it's important to iterate. Everything in an early stage company comes down to the founders, and then the founders hire the team, and keeping the team engaged and motivated. You know, I worked in consulting earlier, and people say about in consulting firms that in a consulting firm, the most important asset leaves the building every day leaves the building every day. And it's sort of, if you get that mindset about your team, that hey, they're the most important asset, and they walk out of the building every day, how does that impact how you recruit them, train them, motivate them, and really build that team energy and work together? The other thing I would say, you know, around, I mentioned raising money earlier, is raising money is a means to an end, not an end in itself. And what I mean by this is I see too many companies that celebrate, and the media does this as well, right? They celebrate, hey, great, this company raised X million dollars. Yay, that's awesome. And I always say, you know what, that's not the objective of the company. The objective of the company is to build a great company. It's not, and raising money is just a means to an end to get there. And so if you think about it like that, then your strategy becomes, I think, much more specific in terms of, okay, when do I need to raise? How much do I need to raise? Should I be raising? And so, as I said, that's super important, that mindset that you think about you're raising money. And it also means, hey, when you're raising money, think about prioritizing who are you raising that money from. Are you guys familiar with a company called Cloudflare? Okay, so it's a public company, very successful. One of the co-founders, a woman named Michelle, she's a Canadian, even though the company was based in Silicon Valley. And when they raised their Series A, they raised money from Union Square Ventures, and they took that money at Union Square Ventures at a valuation that was half of what they had another term sheet. And she said that was one of their best decisions they made, because they optimized not for the valuation and not for the total dollars that they could raise, but instead for getting the right partner, because they thought of it as, hey, this is just a means to an end, and we've just got to get the best team around us. So then finally I'll talk about just sort of some mindset things, some thoughts around having the right mindset to grow and build a business. I think mindset is the biggest difference maker. Launching and scaling a business is extremely tough. I think, you know, I'm talking about starting a business, but frankly, these lessons apply whether you are an entrepreneur or whether you're a technical person, whether you're a team player, you know, whatever you are in life, I believe that these lessons apply. First of all, there's no straight line to success, right? And so, you know, you think about some of the companies that have pivoted along the way. You know, Netflix, if you think about Netflix, right? They used to send DVDs out in the mail, and look at what they're doing now. YouTube actually started as a dating site. Slack was, you know, a gaming development site, and a gaming development site, and then they built the Slack tool for their internal communications, which then went on to be the product that they decided that was more success. That was a better bet than the games that they were developing. So again, there's no straight line to success, and I think that often what happens as entrepreneurs is that you look at other companies out there, and everybody else seems to be doing well, right? You look at these companies, and they all seem to be doing really well. But everybody's struggling. Every company is pivoting and is struggling and has different challenges and is trying to figure things out. And for instance, you know, I remember even when we were growing Kijiji in those early days, it was really tough, and we did a lot of things that didn't work. And I remember talking to somebody, and they were like, you know, Janet, like Kijiji, it was just like, all of a sudden, it came from nowhere, and then it was just everywhere. And I sort of thought, you know, it didn't really feel like that. It sort of felt like it was a whole lot of work and a lot of just slugging it out. And so, as I said, there's no straight line to success. Another sort of example of this is that I have seen companies. I've seen a lot of companies raise follow-on rounds, but sometimes they'll talk to 70 prospective investors, and they'll get one term sheet. And then all you do is read about in the newspaper about how they had this one successful raise, but actually they got turned down 69 times, but they never talked about that, right? And so there's no straight line to success. It's a lot of work, and don't think that the other people, even though it may look like it's easy for them, it's never easy. I think the other thing I would say is what got you here will not get you there. And when you are at a startup company, whether you're, frankly, whatever level, your job is constantly changing. If you're the CEO of a startup company, your job is changing every 6 months because you've got new responsibilities, you've got a new team, you're at a new stage of your company. I remember when I was at eBay, you know, in those early days of eBay, Meg Whitman talking about, hey, like, you've got to be scaling yourself super fast. You've got to be growing super fast just to maintain the same position, right? So, i.e., if you're a vice president of something, just to be a vice president in 2 years would mean that you would need to grow yourself very quickly because the company itself was growing was going to be 4 or 5 times bigger. So therefore your scope of responsibilities would be 4 or 5 times bigger. And so therefore you need to constantly be growing, and you need to understand, as I said, what got you here is not going to get you there. The skills that you've relied on in the past. And so what that means is a continual investment in yourself, whether it's coming to great conferences like this, right? Whether it's meeting other people, having mentors, having friends who are doing similar things, and always learning, always growing. The next thing, you know, that I have learned is life is long and the world is small, and really, you know, having a give first mentality, I think frankly, I think it makes life a lot more fun, but I've also seen it come back. And it has amazed me in my life how having a philosophy of giving first, of you know, making introductions to people, of going out of my way to connect with folks, how it inevitably comes back. And it comes back in spades. And so I think one of the best investments of your time, now, it can be in terms of helping other folks and giving back and giving first. And as I said, it's amazed me how it has come back. And so, you know, for instance, one example of this is I was asked by a mutual friend a couple years ago to have coffee with somebody. She was fairly young in her career. She just moved back to Toronto and she wanted to get into venture. So I said, yeah, okay, no problem. Sure. And so I met with her for half an hour, introduced her to a couple people, and then that was it. And I didn't really think too much about it. And then 2 years later, when we were raising our venture capital firm, it turned out that she was at a large institutional investor who I was trying to raise money from, and she was the person who was tasked with writing the investment memo to invest in my fund. And so again, that's an example of where, hey, you just give back, and that institution ended up investing in our fund. So it's just, as I said, it's amazing when you give generously, when you give first, how things have a habit of coming back around again. Next is, you know, I believe there's no substitute for hustle. What's the expression? Good things come to those who hustle while they wait. The best founders, the best people at anything tend to have this hustle factor where they work. They make that extra call. They go out of their way. And I think about the best founders are always hustling. They're always thinking about what more can I do? What other connection can I make? The best investors, I believe, are always hustling. They're always thinking about how can I help my portfolio companies? Who can I introduce them to? How can I, oh geez, I just read this or this document. How can I use that to help other folks? And then, you know, how you react to setbacks is a significant predictor of success. Everybody has setbacks. I don't know any founder who is just like gone and everything's been easy. It's just a series of challenges and obstacles, but you can leverage those to become how you react to them. You know, do you see that as a setback, a permanent setback, or do you see it as, hey, this is just a change in a a change in terms of the change of plans. It's an opportunity for me to try something new and to go a different way. And so, as I said, how you react is extremely important. And so that's it for my prepared comments. I would love to take any questions that anybody may have. I know we've got a microphone set up, and so if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Great presentation, by the way. Really appreciate it. I was in another session yesterday, and there were a few VCs there, and they were talking about how with the whole, geopolitical uncertainty, a lot of VCs are now shifting away from investing in hardware and commodities and more so software, because you don't have to worry about cross-border, restrictions and so on and so forth. One of the points you made is when you talk to a lot of startup founders, they don't necessarily know what their competitive advantage is going to be. Okay? Once upon a time with software companies, your competitive advantage was essentially the software you had built because it was difficult to replicate, right? Now with AI, a lot of software can just easily be, replicated overnight, at a fraction of the cost. So you may have a lot of companies that actually have software that a year, 2 years ago was valuable, and in the sense that they put a lot of money and time into building it, and then in a week or in a couple of months, they may have somebody who has the exact same thing. So in your shoes, when you're looking at software companies to invest in, how is this AI altered how you look at, software as a competitive asset, knowing that it's something that can be replicated overnight? And what are the other attributes that you're looking at as far as, saying, okay, this company, even though their software can be easily replicated, is still, in my eyes, competitive given all these other variables?
Yep, absolutely. Great question. I'm going to take this. You guys can still hear me, right? Okay. So I think that software can, so we only invest actually in software companies. So we are always looking. I see a lot of companies that are sort of, quote, wrappers on one of the large language models, and we don't invest in those companies because we view those as very easy to replicate. So when I think about how companies can achieve a long-term competitive advantage, there's a couple of ways. One is data. If you are able to get proprietary data, and one way that often happens is if the software is integrated into the workflow. Right. So, for instance, we have invested in a company that's doing AI for clinical research, and clinical researchers actually use their AI during the process, and so therefore they are gaining that process. We have gaining information. We have another company that's in the oil and gas software space, and they are gaining information because from the workflows themselves that gives them so basically almost a network type of advantage. So that is one way. And then I'm thinking about, we do have a couple of companies in our portfolio that I would say do have very strong software that is going to be a differentiator, but they have very significant technology built on top of the large language models, and have top-notch people on their team that we think that they can maintain a competitive advantage in that way.
All right, okay, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Okay, we got another question. Great. Oh, let me put my headphone.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. In my experience with our startup getting venture capital, the company really shifted to essentially reporting to the board instead of trying to grow the company. And so I'm curious what you do differently to make sure you have the insight that you need as the investor in the company, but still balance that kind of mentality, like you mentioned, about the capital isn't the be-all, end-all, and the intention is to build a great company. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, if you have a company where the founders think their job is to report to the board, I think that's bad news, right? And I always say to my founders, and my perspective is that the board is there to service the company rather than the company trying to service the board. And that is critically important. So a couple of things, like I think about one company that we invested in recently, and they actually had that I guess, bad situation where the founder was like, oh yeah, like I always have to be careful about what I say in the board, and we spend a lot of time preparing for the board meetings, and I'm always so nervous, and then we go in, and then I was like, okay, no, like we're stopping that. And so we actually like cut off a bunch of the board members, and I'm like, okay, the board is there to service you. What I want you to do is spend as little time as possible in prepping. The board should be used to brainstorm different ideas. So rather than having an update on the business, what I encourage our companies to do is to send the material in advance. And often what I find is a useful way is that if they have leaders in the company that are giving presentations, rather than having presentations in the board meeting, they each record a Loom video so that all the board members read the material, watch the Loom videos in advance, and then they go in and say, okay, now you're fully updated on the company. We're going to focus the discussion of the board meeting on 2 or 3 meaty strategic issues. And then that's often a good way. So there's different approaches, but it's also tied to how a board member reacts. Like, so for instance, again, this morning I called up one of our founders, and she said, oh my gosh, Janet, I'm so glad you called. Like, we got this big crisis going on. I'm like, okay, great. She said, no, Janet, it's not great. It's not great. It's really bad. I'm like, no. It's great that I called you right at this moment, because now you could tell me about it and let's get it fixed. And so, she told me about it. It was with one of their suppliers. I'm like, okay, no problem. I know the person to call. We got it solved in like 15, 20 minutes. So but I think you've got to have that mentality of like, I'm not going to judge you. I'm here as your partner, as your collaborator. And I say to the founders, hey, if I always called them after the board meeting. How was that? Was that helpful to you? Was that helpful to your team? And I think having that open, it's just a mindset thing. Okay.
In your presentation, you mentioned the importance of a go-to-market strategy and how hard that can be. So when you're evaluating a founding team, how do you prioritize technical expertise versus experience, whatever that means, relevant to go-to-market amongst those team members?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a huge believer in, hey, we are investing for the long term, and therefore I don't look at what can the team do today. I look at what can the team and will the team be able to do over the next 5 to 10 years. And so specifically, if, actually, frankly, we're just investing in a company right now, and their biggest unknown is the go-to-market. They're very technically strong. They have a little bit of ideas, but I'm actually great. I understand this go-to-market, and so we've had several calls brainstorming different things, and I've said, hey, you know what, this is great. I can help you, and we can hire somebody, and we can nail the go-to-market. So to answer your question, therefore, I think I don't actually mind whether there is a go-to-market person on the founding team or not. What I do care about is that they understand that that's a really important nut that they're going to have to crack. They understand that the founders are going to need to be involved, because often there's no better person to sell the company and to get feedback than to solve it, and that they want to have a passion for either me helping them and them getting involved, or potentially hiring somebody else. Okay? It's almost like I would say finances, right, are critical, right? You better have somebody who can keep your books. It doesn't mean that the founders need to be able to keep your books, but they better understand, yeah, it's a good idea to keep my accounting records, right? And so I'd say it's the same thing with that.
Hi, Janet. Thanks for the presentation. It's great. So I'm also a founder. I'm also a founder of a company and a startup. I think my question is on how to attract talents. So in my experience, when we make an offer, and then a lot of the good people, we want them to work for us, but they end up turn down our offers, go to work for a bigger company like Google and Microsoft. That happen a lot. Most of the time, it's not we selecting them, it's they selecting us. So I'm sure the Kijiji, when you started, and you must have this process of recruiting the best people to work for, which we always want that happen. So how do you do it in the very beginning to get the best people to work for your company?
Yeah, so I think it's critically important. I will say, because I've seen this happen across a lot of our portfolio companies, and as I said, like, it's one of the most important thing, if arguably, yeah, you could say but it's definitely, like, it was on my top 3 of things that founders need to do. They need to attract retain, and motivate great people on the team. So how do you do it if you can't pay as much as the big companies? I think first and foremost, you need to be able to tell a compelling story about why they should work with your company, i.e. what is the value proposition? And the value proposition, I mean, maybe a little bit of it can be around, hey, you know what, you're going to get options in this company, and maybe someday you'll be wealthy. But I have found that can be a dangerous thing if that's the only thing you rely on, because then when times start getting tough, you know, they're going to jump ship. And so what you need to talk to them about is, hey, what is our mission? Hopefully you will get people who are excited about being there because they like the mission, they like what the company's doing, they want to be involved in a team, they want to be able to say, I was there from the beginning and I helped to build this company. They believe in what you're doing. So I think that is one part, is just being super clear on that. The other thing at a tactical level that I have found works very well is often I will get on the phone with people to talk to potential hires as an investor. So I would say if you have investors or board members, get them involved, because what you can do is you're suddenly, like if I go and I'm talking to, let's say one of our portfolio companies is hiring somebody senior, I can go and talk to that person and I can explain to them why I as an investor invested in that company, how I have found working with the founders, why I believe it's a great company. And then that potential hire is hearing it from somebody other than the founders. So I find that that's very useful. So that would be tip number 2. And then tip number 3 is maybe, and I don't know, right? Maybe they weren't really meant to be anyways, right? Or I would just say, if you are finding that the people you're talking to are consistently choosing big company over your company, then I would say, hey, are you even talking to the right people? Because were they even looking for a startup experience, which is very different than going and working for a large company, right? Which is a whole different set of, it's a whole different value proposition, right? A different offering. That make sense? Great. Oh, okay, another question. Okay, any other questions from anybody? Oh, we got another question. Great, awesome.
I didn't want to be greedy, just wanted to let other people have a chance. But looks like there's nobody else. But yeah, so just going back to my question. So you said it's one of the things you look at is just making sure that when it comes to companies, that as far as their software, they own the data and it's being integrated into their workflows. So what you're essentially saying there is, are you saying that, you know, along that process, whatever your software is doing, that at those different stages, you're able to, like, you know, mine or pull data that can give you, or, you know, inform big business intelligence along the way, and that's essentially what you're looking at?
So just to be clear, I would say that is not the only. That is one way that a company can get competitive advantage, is if they're able to get the data, if they are part of the workflow, and then they get that workflow information, which enables their models to improve. But that's just one example of how a company can get that data advantage.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Hi. So a lot of the companies that I've seen over the past year or two, it seems like it's almost a prerequisite that everybody is going to be implementing AI in some way as a competitive advantage. Now, AI.
So, by the way, I can't hear you very well. I don't know whether.
Oh.
Yeah, that
works.
works.
It works now?
Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know why. Okay.
Okay, I thought it'd be weird to hear myself coming through my headphones, and it is, but
okay.
I'll persevere. So over the past couple of years, it seems like every deal I've seen has included AI as some form of a competitive advantage. And now my perspective is that not all business models need to have AI as necessarily a competitive advantage. It can certainly be a tool and an asset to any team, but whether or not that is a true differentiator, that is a long-term strategic differentiator like you were talking about, is an open question for each company. And so as you're evaluating deals, how are you thinking about the impact and the pros and cons of a founder or a team taking a very AI-driven approach to trying to solve their problem versus a more conventional approach of software development? And so how do you think about that as this landscape is changing?
Absolutely. So I would say Not all. So we invest, I sort of call them AI-enabled or AI-first companies, right? And AI-first companies are companies that AI is so core to what they're doing that they would not exist without AI. And the AI-enabled are companies that are using technology, but are not necessarily AI. If AI disappeared, they'd still have a technology solution, but they're using AI to like further help them. We have invested in both companies. I view AI as a tool, as a means to an end, not an end in itself. And so I evaluate a company, sort of probably, I don't know, I think it's, standard in terms of, hey, what's your competitive advantage? What are your unit economics, etc. And not do you have AI or not, right? And sometimes, so for instance, we have we have a payments company as an example of a company that's not AI first. It's using AI, but its differentiator is actually its payment stack and how it is, its business model, its approach, and that's what's the differentiator.
And just a quick follow-up.
Oh, sorry, just a second. Yeah?
So just a quick follow-up, maybe advice for some of the founders or prospective founders in the room, like how would you give them advice on how to position their messaging on their use and adoption of AI in order to make that message more impactful for VCs that they're going to be raising against?
So I think VCs, I think you need to sell your business as, hey, this is my business, this is what we're doing, this is why it makes sense, this is why we're the right team. And then either use AI or not. I think that venture capital folks are getting very skeptical of everybody saying everything's in AI and then quickly identifying, actually that's not real AI. So I just think being transparent and not trying to make yourself sound like an AI business when you're not really an AI business, because people will see through that and then you start to lose credibility. Okay.
Hi, I've been following more macro headlines like a capital flight out of the United States due to tariffs or investment going to Europe. I'm wondering, as a Canadian investor, if you're seeing your LPs be more or less active, and how companies that are addressing Canadian, European markets as opposed to being focused on the United States, if the dynamics are shifting for you.
You're talking about our LPs, whether our LPs?
If LPs are investing more heavily in companies that are addressing the Canadian and European markets as well as for yourself.
Yeah, so thank you very much. So just so that, I don't know how many are very familiar with the venture capital space. LPs or limited partners, they're the people who put money into funds, right? So that venture capital, so for Staircase Ventures, we get money from LPs like a Northleaf or RBC or other high net worth individuals. So LPs, by their definition, it will be slower to see that change because funds only raise money every 3 or 4 years, and therefore the decision process, so our funds was raised, then we're raising another fund. But I would say just in general, in terms of what I'm seeing, is that I haven't seen much change in how investors are thinking on any level. About Canada versus US investors still want to invest in Canada. Canadian investors, I think they're still saying, hey, if I'm investing in a company, if there's an opportunity for them to expand into the US, awesome. If there's an opportunity to hire US people because they're the best people, that's great. I think the only change that I have detected in the home market is that Canadian companies, Canadian companies probably of any size, are more likely to buy Canadian software or Canadian products. So that's a good thing, I think. I have not seen, most of our companies are selling into the US, as almost all of them, and none of them have seen any pushback from any American companies who do not want to buy their software because they're Canadian. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, I'm just saying we've got 10 or 12 companies and they haven't seen it. So overall, as I said, it's only been a little bit on the upside where Canadian companies, large Canadian companies, are really trying to buy more Canadian software and Canadian products. Okay.
Hi, Janet. Thank you for all the learnings. I have a question. And before that, I was reading your bio. I realized...
You know, I'm just going to turn my volume up because I'm really having trouble hearing. Here, let me see if I can do this.
Test 1 2 1 2. Test 1 2 1 2.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Hey, hi. Thank you for all the learnings. Before the question, I was reading a bio and I realized you came from a business background, worked for McKinsey, then you transitioned to being a founder and then back to investment roots. Now, earlier you mentioned about being clear to investors, VCs, about, hey, if or not we are an AI company as compared to us using AI tools. Now, how do startups go to investors when the mandate of the investors, institutional investors, their mandate is to only invest in AI companies, and sometimes they lack the experience of AI tooling versus having a layer on top of AI tooling as compared to core AI companies. So how do we communicate that to them during the early stages of the communication where maybe they lack the exposure to the technical side of things and they weren't a founder with your kind of experience?
So I want to make sure I understand your question right. Is your question if you are a founder pitching a venture capital person who's not technical, how do you as a technical founder pitch that?
Especially when their mandate is only to invest in AI companies and they don't provide the clarity on what do they mean by AI companies.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, I would start off with, I'm going to take this off, asking them questions. Like you want to make sure that if you are pitching an investor, that the investor has a mandate that's consistent with what you're doing. So I would start off with saying, hey, can you tell me more about what you're investing in, what your criteria is, all that stuff, what they mean by AI. So that's one thing. With respect to the second part about, hey, if you're a technical founder, how do you pitch a non-technical person? I actually think you should be able to do that, right? And it's a way of figuring it out, or figuring out a way to very clearly communicate what you're doing and what the problem you're solving. And I think the way to get to communicate to a non-technical investor is to communicate at the business level. And only when they understand the business, then do you need to, it's almost like, hey, what you do, communicate what you do, and make sure that they understand what you do and why you do it versus how you do it. Right? And so it's like, hey, we solve this problem for companies, and we solve this problem for companies because it's costing companies X dollars every year, and it's a massive problem, or they're losing customers. And then when they get, okay, now if you want to know how we do it, well, it's sort of technical, and we'll get into it. But get them sold on the business side of the problem you're solving and why that's really important. Okay.
Hi there. Thank you for your presentation today. So with the rise of accelerators, like initial coin offerings, these sort of like founders' direct path to ARR, do you find the role of pre-seed investors and like VCs shifting to later stage, or do you think there's still a place for sort of pre-seed VCs and seed VCs?
I think that there is still absolutely. I think there's still a spot for pre-seed and seed stage investors. I think what's interesting is there may be less of a spot for Series A-ish investors, because what we're finding is that companies, by leveraging AI tools, and I'm talking on their back end, right, not their customer, but by leveraging AI tools in terms of marketing, code development, accounting, whatever, like they are able to grow their company much faster. And so what we're seeing right now is companies that are raising a pre-seed and seed rounds and using that capital to get to cash flow positive while still growing quickly. And that concept was almost unheard of 5 years ago. The concept that you just raise a seed round, like it was a given almost, right? You'd raise a seed round, then you raise your Series A, then you raise your Series B, and you keep going. And I think the combination of the funding environment has been rather rocky, and so a lot of founders just don't want to count on follow-on funding. They don't want to bet the future of their company on getting that Series A round. And B, the fact that they can now grow much more cost effectively because of AI is enabling companies to grow to basically only do like a seed round and then not raise capital after that. Okay. Oh, great, we've got another question. Okay.
I got one more question. This question is about the relationship between the founder and investors. So in your example, the Cloudflare co-founder, so she apparently took half the evaluations. So most of the time, if you have early investor, they might have opinion or maybe they even object that. So because some investor, they have the exit plan and then they want you to go as high as possible. Janet, if you are in that situation, how you will resolve that conflict?
So can you repeat with the question?
For the Cloudflare co-founder, and then she took half the evaluation at the Series A, right? So that in some situations, her early investors.
Or her early investors.
Early investor will be the angel.
So I would argue her early investors should not care about that. I mean, I guess they're going to get diluted, but ultimately the current investor, the early investors, should care about the long-term potential of the company. And what she would say is, well, basically what they shouldn't really care about what, I mean, there are some things around dilution and stuff, but generally speaking, their primary focus should not be on what valuation they raised at their midpoint. It should be, is this company going to be worth $100 million or $5 billion? Right? That is how those early stage investors are going to make their money. And if they took the money from a venture capital firm that put them on the path to be worth multiple billion dollars, which they're worth now, who knows when the early stage investors got out, then that's better than, hey, oh well, we capped out at $100 million valuation. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, listen, everybody, it was great to be here with you. Wonderful questions. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the event.